Thousands of people are being evacuated downstream of a major dam which has collapsed in Russian-held Ukraine. Water is surging down the Dnipro River and is said to pose a catastrophic flooding risk to the city of Kherson. Emergency crews are evacuating residents as floodwater reaches towns and villages.
People are trapped in what became an island. I was taken away by my friends. I had to leave because having spent 3 nights in a bomb shelter, I just cannot take it anymore.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of deliberately blowing up the dam. Russia has denied responsibility, blaming Ukrainian military strikes in the contested area.
The whole world will know about this Russian war crime, the crime of ecocide, this deliberate destruction of the dam and other facilities by the Russian occupiers is an environmental bomb of mass destruction. For the sake of their own security, the world should now show that Russia will not get away with such terror.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our Global Affairs editor, John Lyons, in the studio with me. Hi there, John. So each side is accusing the other of doing this. Who's most likely to have carried it out?
Well, Roz, of course, in the fog of war, very few things are taken as fact. But the Institute of Study of War says that on the balance of evidence, reasoning and rhetoric, you'd have to say it was the Russians. And there appears to be no logic to why Ukrainians or their supporters would cause such massive damage to one of their key infrastructure facilities.
But why would Russia do this? Because it's in Russian-held territory.
Well, I think it's in the lead up to this long-awaited counter-offensive. One thing I think that's been sort of ignored by many elements is that the Ukrainians have been waiting for the ground to dry for the counter-offensive, waiting for winter to pass, for the snow to melt, for the ground to dry, so the tanks can go over it. All of these tanks that they've come in from other NATO countries or from NATO countries, and in a way this completely undercuts that. It also creates more havoc, it creates more fear, it creates more distress for Ukrainian farmers, one of the biggest exporters of grain around the world. This environmentally devastates the farming industry in Ukraine.
Well, it's been catastrophic for the local area. Can you give us a sense of just how big the impact of this is going to be?
Well, hard to know the numbers yet, but thousands of people dislocated. You can see from the pictures we've been watching of people taking their pets and grabbing their suitcases, whatever they can, to flee, on top of all the other terrible things of the nightly missile attacks by Russia, hitting residential buildings, the killing, the raping of Ukrainians. On top of everything else, to have this is a dreadful development.
It's a massive dam, isn't it? What, 2 miles wide?
It's huge. It's one of the largest in Europe. And, as I said, Ukraine is one of the food bowls of the world. So, yet again, people in Africa who rely on food and grain from Ukraine are going to be impacted by this action happening in Central Europe.
Upstream of the dam is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear facility, about which there have been plenty of safety worries in the past, and there are fears again about its stability.
Well, comforting news, if it can be anything comforting out of this, is the International Atomic Energy Agency has inspectors on site, says that there is no immediate or medium-term threat to the facility from the leakage of this dam. So that's at least one point of comfort.
So you've spoken about why Russia might have been behind this, but how overall does it affect the conflict, Russia's bid to defend its territory, Ukraine's efforts to take it back?
I think Ukraine will go ahead with that counter-offensive. I think that counter-offensive has already begun in different forms. For example, the Russian troops who are sympathetic to Ukraine, their raids into Belgorod in recent days. I think that the counter-offensive has begun in different forms. I think it will try to hit long-term. They'll try to hit missiles, long-range missiles into Crimea. It affects it only in the sense of it creates a humanitarian crisis that Ukraine has to deal with. And we can see from those pictures we're watching now the sheer misery, desolation of these people having to try to now rebuild their life in the middle of a war. But I think it also complicates it in terms of the tanks, as I said before, the land activity, I think makes it harder for Ukraine.
You've spent quite a bit of time in Ukraine, John, recently. How would you describe the atmosphere there? Is it still defiant?
Yes, it is defiant. It's traumatised, however. It's a pretty traumatised country. By day, it's incredibly normal. Places like Kyiv are sophisticated, wonderful European cities. Come night time, usually 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., I'd often be woken by the air raid sirens, the missiles, the drones coming in. There was one drone about 30, 40 metres above my balcony in Kyiv. Then the Ukrainians are shooting them all down. It's nightly terror, taking children, taking old people. It's every night it goes on. It's done at night time to cause maximum fear amongst the Ukrainian population.